He's reaching! He's got a gun!" The scream shattered the quiet night, followed immediately by the sickening pop of a taser and the thud of a body hitting the asphalt. In the blink of an eye, Officer Brett Calloway turned a Good Samaritan act into a life-threatening crime scene. The police report would say the suspect was aggressive, non-compliant, and armed. It was a perfect lie, crafted by a veteran cop who knew how to manipulate the system. But Calloway made one fatal mistake. He assumed the man he was brutalizing was just another helpless statistic. He didn't know he was assaulting a federal prosecutor with a photographic memory and a hidden body camera that was rolling in 4K resolution. The lie traveled halfway around the world, but the truth was putting its boots on. The rain in Oakhaven wasn't the cleansing kind. It was a cold, miserable drizzle that turned the Georgia clay into a slick paste. Gwen Pierce didn't mind the rain, though. At 45, Gwen had weathered storms far worse than a November shower. He tightened the lug nuts on the Ford Taurus, his expensive Italian suit jacket folded neatly inside his own car, a modest rented sedan, to keep it dry. "Almost done, Mrs. Gable," Gwen called out, his voice deep and reassuring. Sarah Gable, a 70-year-old retired librarian with thick glasses and shaking hands, stood under Gwen's umbrella, looking anxious. "I am so sorry to trouble you, sir. My son usually handles this, but he's deployed." Gwen smiled, wiping grease from his hands onto a rag. "It's no trouble. You can't be sitting on the side of Route 9 at this hour. Dangerous folks out here." Gwen stood up, stretching his back. He was a tall man, 6'3", with broad shoulders that often made people assume he was an athlete. In reality, he was a senior investigator for the Department of Justice, specializing in police corruption and civil rights violations. He was in town quietly, visiting his dying uncle, keeping a low profile. He hadn't told the local precinct he was there. He wanted peace. But peace was rare in Oakhaven. Blue lights flashed in the distance, cutting through the gloom. A cruiser slowed down, tires crunching on the wet gravel. Gwen didn't flinch. He was doing a good deed. He had done nothing wrong. The cruiser door opened, and Officer Brett Calloway stepped out. Calloway was a man who wore his badge like a crown and his gun like a threat. He was thick around the middle, with a buzz cut that hadn't been in style for a decade. His partner, a younger, nervous-looking rookie named Officer Miller, stayed by the car door, hand hovering near his holster. "Step away from the vehicle," Calloway barked, bypassing a greeting entirely. Gwen wiped his hands again, keeping them visible. "Good evening, officer. Just changing a tire for this lady." "I didn't ask for your life story," Calloway snapped, marching forward, his hand resting on his taser. "I said step away from the vehicle. Now." Mrs. Gable stepped forward, trembling. "Officer Calloway, it's me, Sarah Gable. This nice young man stopped to help." "Stay back, Sarah," Calloway ordered, his eyes never leaving Gwen. "You don't know who this guy is. He could be anyone." He turned his flashlight directly into Gwen's eyes, blinding him. "ID. Now." Gwen sighed internally. He knew the type. He dealt with Calloways every day in courtrooms in D.C., small men with big power complexes. "My wallet is in my car, officer, on the passenger seat. I'm going to walk over there and get it." "No, you're not," Calloway said, closing the distance. "You're acting jittery, nervous. What's in the car? Drugs? Stolen goods?" "It's a rental," Gwen said calmly, his voice steady. "And I'm not nervous. I'm wet and I'm tired. I'm going to get my ID so we can all go home." "Turn around," Calloway shouted suddenly, escalating the situation from 0 to 100 in a heartbeat. "Hands on the hood, now." "For changing a tire?" Gwen asked, his brow furrowing. "Officer, what is the probable cause here?" "I am the probable cause," Calloway roared, shoving Gwen hard against Mrs. Gable's car. The old woman gasped, dropping the umbrella. "Officer, stop!" Mrs. Gable cried out. "He helped me!" "Back up!" Miller shouted at the old woman, finally finding his voice. Gwen didn't resist. He knew the law better than Calloway ever would. Resistance was what they wanted. It justified the violence. He placed his hands on the cold metal of the hood. "Spread 'em," Calloway grunted, kicking Gwen's legs apart. He patted Gwen down aggressively, his hands searching rough and fast. He found nothing but a cell phone in Gwen's pocket. "Clean," Calloway muttered, sounding disappointed. He stepped back. "Now, keep your hands where I can see them. Miller, run the plates on the rental." Gwen slowly turned his head. "Officer, my name is Gwen Pierce. If you let me get my ID." "I told you to keep your eyes forward," Calloway screamed. And then it happened. Gwen's phone, which Calloway had pulled halfway out of his pocket during the search, slipped. It slid down Gwen's leg and hit the pavement with a clack. Reflexively, a human instinct that defies logic, Gwen moved his right hand down to catch it. "Gun!" Calloway screamed. The world slowed down. Gwen saw the manic gleam in Calloway's eyes. He saw the satisfaction of a predator who finally had an excuse. "No!" Mrs. Gable screamed. Pop hiss. The taser prongs hit Gwen in the chest. 50,000 volts locked his muscles. He couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. He fell backward, slamming his head against the asphalt, his body convulsing in the mud. "He's reaching! He's reaching for it!" Calloway was yelling for the dash cam, for the radio, for the audience of one terrified old lady. He dropped his taser and drew his service weapon, pointing it at Gwen's twitching form. "Show me your hands! Show me your hands!" Gwen couldn't show him anything. He was paralyzed, staring up at the rain, watching his life dissolve into the chaos of a corrupt cop's ego. But Calloway didn't see the tiny red light blinking on the inside of Gwen's shirt collar. A light attached to a button-sized lens, a lens that had seen everything. The back of the squad car smelled of stale coffee and vomit sanitizer. Gwen sat handcuffed, his head throbbing from the impact with the road. The dizziness was fading, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. He didn't speak. He hadn't said a word since they hauled him off the ground. From the front seat, Officer Calloway was on the radio, his voice pitched high, breathless, an Oscar-worthy performance of a man who had just survived a shootout. "Dispatch, suspect in custody. Code 4, requesting EMS for suspect. Minor injuries from fall. He lunged, dispatch, reached for his waistband. I feared for my life and the safety of the civilian." Gwen stared at the back of Calloway's head. Waistband, he thought. The magic word. Officer Miller was driving, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Brett, I didn't see a gun," Miller whispered, his voice shaking. "It was a phone. I saw it fall." Calloway hit the mute button on the radio and glared at his partner. "You saw a dark object. You saw a furtive movement. In the heat of the moment, with the rain and the lighting, it looked like a weapon." "That is what you saw, Miller. Unless you want to explain to the chief why you let a potential cop killer reach for a weapon without reacting." Miller swallowed hard, his eyes flicking to Gwen in the rearview mirror. "But he was helping Mrs. Gable." "Cover," Calloway spat. "Criminals do it all the time. Lure people in. Look, Miller, you're 3 months out of the academy. You want a career? You back your partner. That guy back there? He's nobody. A drifter. Look at him. No ID. Rental car. He's probably running drugs up the corridor. We just did the community a favor." Gwen listened, cataloguing every word. Drifter. Nobody. If his head didn't hurt so much, he would have laughed. They arrived at the precinct, a brick block of a building that hadn't been renovated since the 80s. Calloway hauled Gwen out roughly, parading him through the booking area. "What we got, Brett?" The desk sergeant, A heavy-set man named Jenkins looked up from his sandwich. "Assault on a police officer, resisting arrest, disorderly conduct," Calloway recited, tossing Gwen's confiscated items onto the counter. The phone, the keys, the wallet they had finally retrieved from his car. Jenkins whistled. "Busy night. Did he tag you?" "Tried to," Calloway lied smoothly. "Went for a piece. Had to tase him." Jenkins looked at Gwen. "You got a name, tough guy?" Gwen stood straight, despite the handcuffs biting into his wrists. He looked Jenkins in the eye. "My name is Gwen Pearce. I am invoking my Fifth Amendment right to remain silent. I am also requesting immediate access to my attorney." Calloway laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Lawyer up all you want, pal. Public defender won't be in until Monday morning. You're spending the weekend in the tank." "Process him," Calloway ordered Miller. "I gotta go write the report. Needs to be airtight." As Miller pushed Gwen toward the fingerprint scanner, Gwen spoke for the first time to the rookie. His voice was low, barely a whisper. "Officer Miller, you have a choice right now." Miller froze, looking around nervously. "Don't talk to me." "Your partner is writing a fiction," Gwen said calmly. "The report he files is a legal document. If you sign it, or if you corroborate it in your notes, you are committing a felony. Perjury, filing a false report, conspiracy to violate civil rights." "Shut up," Miller hissed, but his hands were trembling as he pressed Gwen's thumb onto the glass. "I'm not a drifter, Officer Miller," Gwen continued, his eyes boring into the young man's soul. "And that wasn't a dark object. It was an iPhone 15 Pro, blue titanium. You saw it." Miller shoved him toward the holding cell. "I said shut up." Gwen was placed in a holding cell with a steel bench and a toilet that smelled like rust. He sat down, closing his eyes. He needed to focus. Calloway was out there right now, crafting at the narrative. He would say Gwen was aggressive. He would say Mrs. Gable was in danger. He would say the reach was distinct and threatening. What Calloway didn't know was that the button on Gwen's shirt, a high-end prototype surveillance device given to him by a tech contact at the FBI, uploaded directly to a secure cloud server. The footage wasn't on a memory card Calloway could smash. It was already sitting in a server farm in Virginia. Gwen waited an hour. Then he went to the bars. "Guard," he called out. A bored deputy walked over. "Quiet down." "I need to make my phone call," Gwen said. "It is my statutory right." The deputy rolled his eyes but unlocked the door. 2 minutes. Don't make me regret it." Gwen was led to the wall phone. He didn't call a bail bondsman. He didn't call a local lawyer. He dialed a number he knew by heart. "Director's office," a crisp female voice answered after 2 rings. "Sarah, it's Gwen," he said. "Gwen? We weren't expecting to hear from you until Tuesday. How is your uncle?" "He's hanging in there. Listen, I need you to patch me through to Gordon. Now." "The Attorney General is in a dinner meeting, Gwen." "Can it wait?" "No," Gwen said, staring across the booking room at Calloway, who was laughing with another officer, miming a gun with his fingers. "Tell him one of his senior investigators has been arrested on fabricated charges in Oak Haven. Tell him I have footage of a civil rights violation in progress. And tell him I want the cavalry." There was a silence on the other end, followed by the clicking of a transfer. Gwen hung up the phone and walked back to his cell. He sat down on the bench and crossed his arms. The nightmare was just beginning for him. But for Officer Brett Calloway, the apocalypse was already on its way. Sunday morning in Oak Haven broke with a deceptive calm. While Gwen Pearce sat on the cold steel bench of his cell, meditating to keep his heart rate steady, the machine outside was grinding into gear. In the office of Police Chief Roy O'Connell, the mood was tense, but managed. O'Connell was a man who had survived 3 separate corruption scandals, by knowing exactly which hands to shake and which necks to step on. He sat behind his mahogany desk, staring at the grainy footage from Officer Calloway's dash cam on a loop. "It's dark," O'Connell grunted, chewing on an unlit cigar. "The rain messes with the depth perception." Calloway stood by the window, looking out at the parking lot. He had shaved and put on his dress uniform. He looked every bit the hero cop the town expected him to be. "It's clear enough, Chief. You see the dip? Right there." He pointed at the screen. He drops his shoulder. "That's the reach. That's the kill movement. I didn't wait to see the muzzle flash. I followed protocol." O'Connell paused the video. "And the object, the phone?" "It looked like a Glock 19 in the shadows," Calloway said without hesitation. "Black, metallic, rectangular. Miller saw it too." "Didn't you, Miller?" Officer Miller was sitting in the corner, staring at his boots. He looked like he hadn't slept. His conscience was a physical weight in his gut, twisting and turning. I saw something fall, Chief. It happened fast." "Exactly," O'Connell said, satisfied. "Split-second decision. Better to be judged by 12 than carried by 6, right?" The chief picked up his phone. "I'm going to call the district attorney. We need to get ahead of this. If this guy Pierce really is a drifter, nobody will care. But just in case, we paint the picture first. We control the narrative." By noon, the Oak Haven Police Department's official Facebook page had posted a press release. Officer-involved incident. Last night, an Oak Haven officer was forced to deploy non-lethal force against a non-compliant subject who reached for a potential weapon during a traffic stop. The suspect, identified as Gwen Pierce, has no local address and is currently being held on charges of assault on a police officer and resisting arrest. We are thankful our brave men and women in blue made it home safe. The comment section filled up instantly. "Thank you, Officer Calloway. Keep our streets safe from these thugs. If you don't want to get tased, listen to the police." Meanwhile, Mrs. Sarah Gable was sitting in her kitchen, her hands trembling as she held a cup of tea. There was a knock at the door. It wasn't the police. It was a reporter from the local county paper, hungry for a scoop. "Mrs. Gable, I heard you were there," the reporter asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Can you tell me how terrified you were when the suspect attacked the officer?" Sarah blinked, confused. "Attacked? No, dear. That man, Mr. Pierce, he was changing my tire. He was a gentleman." The reporter paused, pen hovering. "But the police report says he was aggressive, screaming, reaching for a gun." "He didn't scream," Sarah whispered, tears forming in her eyes. "The officer screamed. The officer he was so angry, for no reason." The reporter frowned. This wasn't the story his editor wanted. "Mrs. Gable, it was raining. You were scared. Maybe you didn't see it clearly. The police are professionals." "I know what I saw," Sarah said, her voice finding a sudden, brittle strength. "And I know what I heard." Back at the precinct, Calloway walked past the holding cells. He stopped in front of cell 4. Gwen was sitting perfectly still, his eyes closed. "Comfortable," Calloway sneered, tapping his baton against the bars. Gwen opened his eyes. They were devoid of fear. They were cold, calculating, and terrifyingly calm. "Enjoying your victory lap, officer?" "I'm going home to a steak dinner," Calloway said, grinning. "You're looking at 5 to 10 years, assault on an officer, in this county. You're done. I'd tell you to call a lawyer, but I doubt you can afford one." "My lawyer is already here," Gwen said softly. Calloway laughed. "Who?" "The public defender, Old Man Higgins. He sleeps through arraignments." "No," Gwen said. "Not Higgins." At that moment, the heavy steel door to the cell block buzzed open. The deputy on duty looked up, annoyed, but his expression froze when he saw the man walking in. He was wearing a charcoal three-piece suit that cost more than the deputy made in 3 months. He carried a leather briefcase and walked with the stride of a man who owned every room he entered. He was Robert Felicity, one of the most feared defense attorneys on the East Coast. Sharp, ruthless, and precise. "I'm here to see my client," Felicity said, his voice smooth as silk, but hard as granite. "Gwen Pierce," Calloway frowned. "Who the hell are you?" Felicity didn't even look at Calloway. He looked straight at Gwen. "Sorry I'm late, Gwen. The jet had a mechanical issue in D.C. Had to charter a backup." Calloway's smirk faltered. "Jet." "It's fine, Robert," Gwen said, standing up and smoothing his wrinkled shirt. Officer Calloway was just keeping me entertained with his version of events. Felicity finally turned his gaze to Calloway. It was like being looked at by a shark. "Officer Calloway, I've read your report. It's a fascinating work of fiction. I look forward to tearing it apart, line by line." Calloway felt a chill run down his spine, but he puffed his chest out. "You're not from around here, lawyer. We do things differently in Oakhaven." "I know," Felicity said, a thin, dangerous smile playing on his lips. "That's exactly why I'm here. To burn the way you do things to the ground." Monday morning arrived with the heaviness of a judgment day. The Oakhaven County Courthouse was buzzing. The local media had picked up the story, framing it exactly as Calloway had hoped. Hero cop versus violent drifter. The courtroom was packed. In the front row, Officer Calloway sat with his arms crossed, wearing his dress uniform, looking solemn. Beside him sat Chief O'Connell. They were presenting a united front. On the other side of the aisle, Mrs. Gable sat alone, clutching her purse. She looked small and frightened, but she had refused to stay home. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. Judge Henry Thorne swept in. Thorne was a law and order judge, known for handing out maximum sentences and siding with the police in 99% of cases. He sat down, adjusting his glasses, and looked at the docket. Case number 4920, the state of Georgia versus Gwen Pierce. Gwen was led in. He was still wearing his dirty, rumpled suit from the tire change, his hands cuffed in front of him. But he walked with his head high. Beside him, Robert Felicity looked pristine, arranging his papers with surgical precision. District Attorney Harrison stood up. Harrison was a man with political ambitions, aiming for the governor's mansion. A high-profile conviction of a cop attacker was exactly what he needed. "Your Honor," Harrison began, his voice booming, "the state requests that bail be denied. The defendant is a transient with no ties to the community. He violently assaulted a decorated officer. He is a flight risk and a danger to the public." Judge Thorne looked over his glasses at the defense table. "Mr. Felicity, is it? You're not local." "No, Your Honor," Felicity said, standing up. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I am practicing pro hac vice for this matter." "Very well. Do you have anything to say regarding bail?" "We do, Your Honor," Felicity said. "The prosecution describes my client as a transient and a danger. This is a gross mischaracterization designed to prejudice the court." "I have the police report right here," Harrison interrupted, waving the file. "Officer Calloway states clearly that the suspect refused to identify himself, had no ID, and lunged for a weapon. The suspect," Felicity corrected calmly, "attempted to retrieve his phone, which Officer Calloway had knocked from his pocket. And as for the ID, my client tried to retrieve it from his vehicle, as requested, before he was assaulted." "Assaulted?" Calloway stood up in the gallery, unable to help himself. He resisted arrest. "Sit down, officer." Judge Thorne banged his gavel. "Mr. Felicity, Those are serious accusations against a police officer. I hope you have more than just your client's word." "Oh, we have much more than that, Your Honor," Felicity said. "But first, let's address the flight risk. The district attorney claims Mr. Pierce has no ties to the community and no employment." Felicity picked up a single sheet of paper from his briefcase. "Gwen Pierce is not a drifter, Your Honor. He is a resident of Virginia. He owns a home in Alexandria. And as for his employment—" Felicity paused. He turned to look directly at D.A. Harrison, then at Calloway. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. "Mr. Pierce is a senior investigator for the United States Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. Specifically, he heads the task force on police misconduct and excessive force." The air left the room. D.A. Harrison dropped his pen. It clattered loudly on the floor. In the gallery, Officer Calloway's face went from smug satisfaction to a ghostly pale in the span of a second. He gripped the bench in front of him. "Department of Justice?" Chief O'Connell stiffened, his eyes widening. He looked at Calloway with a mixture of shock and fury. "You tased a Fed?" "Furthermore," Felicity continued, his voice ringing out like a bell, "Mr. Pierce is a former federal prosecutor with a 98% conviction rate. He is not a danger to the community, Your Honor. He is a pillar of the justice system that this court is supposed to uphold." Judge Thorne stared at Gwen. The dirty suit suddenly didn't look like the clothes of a homeless man. It looked like a ruined, expensive suit. The calm demeanor didn't look like arrogance. It looked like discipline. "Mr. Harrison," Judge Thorne said, his voice tight, "did the state run a background check?" The system was down over the weekend. We ran a local check," Harrison stammered, sweating profusely. "We didn't know." "Ignorance is not an argument for holding a federal agent without bail," Felicity said. "We request immediate release on personal recognizance." "Granted," Judge Thorne said instantly, banging the gavel. "Mr. Pierce is released. We will set a preliminary hearing for Wednesday." "Thank you, Your Honor," Felicity said. "One more thing. We formally request the preservation of all evidence. Dashcam footage, radio logs, and specifically—" Felicity turned to look at Miller, who was shrinking into his seat in the back row. "Officer Miller's body camera footage." Harrison cleared his throat. "Your Honor, Officer Miller's camera was malfunctioning. It wasn't recording. It was the lie they had agreed upon in the chief's office, the final nail in the coffin of the truth." Gwen finally spoke. He leaned into the microphone, his voice deep and resonant. "That's unfortunate," Gwen said, "because Officer Calloway's report relies heavily on his perspective. Without a second angle, it's just his word against mine." "And the word of a decorated officer carries weight in this court," Harrison shouted, trying to regain control. "You may be a DOJ suit, Mr. Pierce, but that doesn't mean you didn't snap and reach for a gun on a rainy night. Cops have a stressful job." Calloway nodded vigorously. The narrative could still be saved. It was a misunderstanding, a fog of war incident. They could argue qualified immunity. They could say Pierce moved too fast. Gwen looked at Calloway. He offered a small, chilling smile. "We'll see about that," Gwen whispered to Felicity as the bailiff unlocked his handcuffs. As the court adjourned, reporters swarmed. The headline had already changed. It was no longer Drifter attacks cop. It was local police tase, top federal investigator. But Calloway, walking out the side door with the chief, was trying to convince himself he was safe. "They don't have video," Calloway muttered to O'Connell. "My dashcam is grainy. Miller's was broken. It's my word. I can articulate the threat. I can win this." O'Connell looked at him with disgust. "You better hope so, Brett. Because if you go down, I'm not going with you." Gwen walked out the front steps of the courthouse, the sun finally breaking through the clouds. He adjusted his cuffs, rubbing the red marks on his wrists. Felicity handed him a fresh phone. "The video is processed, Gwen. The audio is crystal clear. The 4K resolution, it's beautiful. You can count the raindrops." "Don't release it yet," Gwen said, looking at the retreating police cruisers. "Let them lie under oath one more time. I want them to commit to the story at the hearing. I want the chief, the DA, and Calloway to sign their names to the lie." "You want to nuke the whole department," Felicity noted. "I don't want to nuke it," Gwen said, getting into Felicity's waiting limousine. "I want to surgically remove the cancer, and to do that, I need to let it grow for 2 more days." Wednesday arrived with the suffocating humidity, typical of a Georgia storm aftermath. The preliminary hearing was set to determine if there was sufficient evidence to proceed with the charges against Gwen Pierce. But more importantly, it was the moment Officer Brett Calloway had to solidify his lie under the penalty of perjury. The courtroom was fuller than before. National news outlets had picked up the scent. Federal agent arrested by small-town cop. It was the kind of headline that brought the vultures circling. DA Harrison looked tired. He had spent the last 48 hours trying to verify Gwen's credentials, hoping for a loophole, a smudge on the record, anything to discredit the man. He found nothing. Gwen Pierce was a ghost in the public sector, but a legend in the DOJ. Harrison knew his only play was the heat-of-the-moment defense. If he could prove Calloway acted reasonably based on a perceived threat, the charges might drop, but the department would avoid a lawsuit. "The state calls Officer Brett Calloway to the stand," Harrison announced. Calloway walked to the witness box. He looked the part of the grieving hero, somber, serious, shoulders squared. He placed his hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. "Officer Calloway," Harrison began, pacing in front of the jury box, although there was no jury today, only Judge Thorne. "Walk us through the night of November 14th. Calloway took a sip of water. It was raining heavily. Visibility was poor. We observed a vehicle on the shoulder. Officer Miller and I initiated a welfare check. Upon approaching, the subject, Mr. Pierce, became immediately belligerent." "Belligerent how?" Harrison asked. "He refused to answer questions. He stepped into my personal space. He was shouting about his rights, trying to incite the elderly woman, Mrs. Gable, into a panic." Gwen sat at the defense table, his face a mask of stone. He wrote nothing. He just watched. And then what happened? "I asked for ID," Calloway continued, his confidence growing. "He refused. He made a sudden movement toward his waistband. I saw a metallic object. I shouted, 'Gun!' And he didn't stop. He screamed, 'You're not taking me!' and lunged. I deployed my taser to neutralize the threat. 'Did you see a phone?' Harrison asked. 'No, sir. In that lighting it looked exactly like a compact firearm. I acted to save my life and the life of my partner.' 'Thank you, officer.' Harrison sat down, looking satisfied. Robert Felicity stood up. He didn't button his jacket. He walked slowly toward the witness stand, holding a single piece of yellow legal paper. "Officer Calloway," Felicity said, his voice deceptively light. "You stated the visibility was poor." "Yes. Yet you claimed to have seen a specific lunging motion and a metallic object, clearly enough to identify it as a threat." "I saw the glint," Calloway said. "I saw the aggression. You said my client screamed, 'You're not taking me.' Are you certain those were his exact words?" Calloway hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Yes, I am certain." "Interesting," Felicity said, "because in your initial police report, filed 3 hours after the incident, you wrote that the suspect muttered threats. Now, 2 days later, you remember a specific scream. Which is it, officer? A mutter or a scream?" It was chaotic, Calloway snapped. I remember the scream now. So your memory has improved with time. That's rare. Felicity turned to the judge. No further questions for this witness. Calloway stepped down, feeling a bead of sweat roll down his back. He had expected a harder fight. Why didn't he push harder, he wondered. Maybe they really don't have anything. The state calls Officer Ryan Miller. The rookie looked like he was walking to the gallows. His skin was pasty, his eyes darting around the room. He sat in the chair, avoiding looking at Gwen. Officer Miller, Harrison said gently. You were there. Did you see the suspect reach? Miller gripped the armrests. He looked at Calloway, who was staring at him with hard, warning eyes. Stick to the script, that look said, or your career is over. I saw a movement, Miller stammered. And was it threatening? Yes. It was fast. And did you hear the suspect scream? Miller closed his eyes. He thought about the mortgage he just signed. He thought about his pregnant wife. Yes, he whispered. I heard a shout. Thank you, Harrison said. Felicity stood up. He didn't walk to the stand this time. He just stood by his table. Officer Miller, Felicity said softly, I want to remind you that you are under oath. Federal perjury charges carry a mandatory minimum sentence. Are you aware of that? Objection! Harrison jumped up. Counsel is intimidating the witness. I am merely ensuring the witness understands the gravity of his next answer, Felicity countered. Officer Miller, did you see a gun? I saw what Brett saw, Miller evaded. That's not what I asked. I asked what you saw. Did you see a gun? Miller looked at Gwen. Gwen's expression wasn't angry. It was almost pitying. I saw a dark object, Miller whispered. And the body camera? Felicity asked. The one that was conveniently malfunctioning. Did you check it before your shift? Yes. And it was working then? Yes. So it failed exactly at the moment my client was assaulted? I guess so. Felicity sighed, shaking his head. No further questions. Miller fled the stand, looking like he was about to be sick. D.A. Harrison stood up, buttoning his jacket. Your Honor, the testimony is consistent. 2 officers confirm the suspect was aggressive and non-compliant. The object turned out to be a phone, yes, but the officers acted reasonably under the Graham v. Connor standard. We ask that the case proceed to trial. Judge Thorne looked at the defense table. Mr. Felicity, do you have any witnesses? Felicity smiled. It was the smile of a predator who had just watched the trap snap shut. We have no witnesses, Your Honor, Felicity said, but we do have a piece of evidence that was entered into discovery this morning at 9 a.m., time-stamped just before this hearing began. I didn't receive any evidence, Harrison objected. Check your email, Mr. District Attorney, Felicity said coldly. But for the benefit of the court, we would like to play Defense Exhibit A. Felicity pulled a small remote from his pocket and pointed it at the large flat-screen monitor mounted on the courtroom wall. Officer Calloway claimed visibility was poor, Felicity said to the room. He claimed my client screamed. He claimed my client lunged. And Officer Miller claimed his camera was broken. Felicity paused for effect. My client, Mr. Pierce, was wearing a Gen 4 micro-optic recording device concealed in his shirt button. It records in 4K resolution with noise-cancelling audio enhancement. It does not malfunction. Calloway stopped breathing. The blood drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. Let's watch the truth, Felicity said, and pressed play. The screen flickered to life. The clarity was shocking. Even in the rain, the lens picked up the water droplets on the hood of the car. The audio was crisp, cutting through the wind. Video playback, Gwen's voice, calm, polite. "Good evening, officer. Just changing a tire for this lady." Calloway's voice, aggressive, loud. "Step away from the vehicle. I didn't ask for your life story." The courtroom watched in stunned silence. They saw Gwen's compliance. They saw his hands up. They heard Mrs. Gable's terrified plea. Calloway, on screen. "I am the probable cause." A collective gasp went through the gallery. That wasn't police work. That was a power trip. Then came the critical moment. Calloway. "Turn around. Hands on the hood. Now." The camera view shifted as Gwen turned. The audio picked up the rustle of fabric. Then, clear as day, the sound of the phone sliding. Clack. Gwen. "Officer, my phone dropped. I'm just—" Calloway. "Gun." There was no scream from Gwen. No, "You're not taking me." No lunge. Just a man, reflexively reaching for a dropped item, followed instantly by the pop of the taser. The video showed Gwen falling, the camera angle tilted to the sky, rain falling into the lens. But the audio kept rolling. Calloway, breathing hard. He's reaching for it." Miller, panicked. "Brett, I didn't see a gun. It was a phone. I saw it fall." Calloway, hissing. "Shut up. You saw a dark object. You saw a furtive movement. That is what you saw, Miller." The courtroom was dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. This wasn't just excessive force. This was conspiracy. This was the fabrication of a crime, captured in high definition. But the video didn't stop there. The screen went black as Gwen was shoved into the cruiser, but the audio continued. Calloway, in the car. "He's a nobody, a drifter. Look at him, no ID, rental car. We just did the community a favor." Then, the scene shifted to the booking room. The audio picked up Calloway laughing. Calloway. "Lawyer up all you want, pal. You're spending the weekend in the tank." Felicity paused the video. The freeze frame showed the wet asphalt where Gwen had writhed in pain. Felicity turned to the witness box, where Calloway was still sitting, though he looked like he wanted to melt through the floor. "Officer Calloway," Felicity said, his voice thundering now. "You just testified under oath that my client screamed, 'You're not taking me.' We just heard the entire encounter. Those words were never spoken. Did you lie to this court?" Calloway opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at D.A. Harrison for help, but Harrison was staring at his desk, distancing himself as fast as possible. "Officer Calloway," Judge Thorne barked, his face red with fury. "Answer the question." I misremembered," Calloway croaked. "You misremembered conspiring with your partner to frame a man?" Felicity asked. "You misremembered telling Officer Miller what to put in his report?" Felicity turned to the gallery. "This video proves 3 things. 1. My client was innocent of any crime. 2. Officer Calloway assaulted a federal agent. And 3. Officer Calloway, Officer Miller, and potentially others within the Oak Haven Police Department engaged in a conspiracy to obstruct justice." Felicity walked back to his table and sat down. "Defense moves for immediate dismissal of all charges against Gwen Pierce," Felicity said calmly, "and we move for the immediate arrest of Brett Calloway for perjury and filing a false police report." Judge Thorne slammed his gavel so hard the handle nearly cracked. "Charges dismissed, with prejudice," Thorne roared. "Bailiff, take Officer Calloway into custody immediately. I want him held in contempt until the district attorney can file formal charges. And Officer Miller, don't you go anywhere." The courtroom erupted. Reporters were shouting into their phones. Mrs. Gable was sobbing with relief. 2 deputies, men Calloway had worked with for 10 years, walked over to him. They didn't look him in the eye. "Stand up, Brett," one of them muttered. Calloway stood, his legs shaking. As they clicked the handcuffs onto his wrists, the same wrists that had been so quick to shackle Gwen, he looked across the room. Gwen Pierce was standing. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't gloating. He just looked at Calloway with a profound, heavy disappointment. As Calloway was led out the side door, stripped of his belt and badge, the double doors at the back of the courtroom burst open. 6 men and women in windbreakers marched in. On the back of their jackets, in bold yellow letters, FBI. Leading them was Special Agent in Charge, Eleanor Vance's successor, Agent Thomas Wright, avoiding the name Vance as requested, using Wright. "Nobody leaves!" Agent Wright shouted. "This courtroom is now a federal crime scene." D.A. Harrison stood up, trembling. "Now see here, I'm the district attorney." "Not anymore, you're not," Wright said, holding up a warrant. "We have a warrant for the seizure of all servers, emails and case files of the Oak Haven District Attorney's Office and the Police Department. We are investigating a pattern and practice of civil rights violations." Gwen walked over to Agent Wright. They shook hands. "Took you long enough, Tom," Gwen said. "Traffic was hell," Wright replied. "We ready to clean house?" "Start with the chief," Gwen said, pointing to the back of the room where Chief O'Connell was trying to sneak out the exit. He signed off on the report knowing the body cam footage was missing. 2 FBI agents intercepted O'Connell before he could touch the door handle. Gwen turned to Felicity. "Good work, Robert." "All in a day's billable hours," Felicity said, packing his briefcase. "But I think the real show is just starting." Gwen looked at the chaos around him. The corrupt system that had tried to crush a drifter was now collapsing under the weight of its own arrogance. But Gwen knew this wasn't just about him. It was about every drifter who didn't have a 4K button camera and a high-powered attorney. He walked over to Mrs. Gable, who was still sitting in the front row, stunned. "Mrs. Gable," Gwen said gently, "I believe I still owe you a tire change." The old woman looked up, tears streaming down her face, and laughed. "I think I'll call a tow truck this time, Mr. Pierce." Gwen smiled, probably for the best. He walked out of the courthouse, into the fresh air. The storm was over, but the flood was just beginning for the Oak Haven PD. The arrest of Officer Brett Calloway and the seizure of the Oak Haven Police Department were not just local news. They became a national firestorm. The video of Gwen's calm compliance juxtaposed with Calloway's hysterical aggression was played on every cable news network from New York to Los Angeles. It was the perfect storm, a decorated federal prosecutor, a corrupt small-town cop, and undeniable 4K evidence of a frame-up. But for Gwen Pierce, the courtroom victory was just the opening salvo. The hard karma wasn't just about one arrest. It was about dismantling the machine that allowed men like Calloway to exist. In the days following the hearing, the Oak Haven precinct was turned upside down. Agent Thomas Wright and his FBI team treated the station like a hostile foreign territory. They didn't just look at the Calloway incident. They looked at everything. They found the ghost tickets, citations issued to out-of-towners who never showed up to court, funding an off-the-books slush fund for the chief's office. They found the evidence locker discrepancies, where drugs seized in busts mysteriously lost weight before trial. Chief O'Connell, the man who had sat comfortably behind his mahogany desk for 20 years, was dragged out of his home in front of his neighbors at 6 a.m. on a Friday. He wasn't wearing his uniform. He was in his bathrobe, looking old and defeated. "You can't do this!" O'Connell sputtered as agents loaded boxes of financial records from his home office into a van. "I have friends in the Senate." "Your friends aren't picking up the phone, Roy," Agent Wright said, handing him the indictment. "RICO charges, racketeering, conspiracy, wire fraud, and deprivation of rights under color of law. You're looking at 40 years. Meanwhile, in a federal interrogation room, Officer Miller sat across from Gwen. The rookie looked like he had aged 10 years in a week. He had been offered a deal, immunity from prosecution in exchange for full testimony against Calloway, O'Connell, and the rest of the good old boys network. I didn't want to lie. Miller wept, his head in his hands. Calloway told me. He said if I didn't back him, I'd be the one responding to domestic calls alone with no backup. He said they'd freeze me out. I was scared. Gwen sat quietly, listening. He didn't offer sympathy, but he didn't offer cruelty either. Fear is a powerful motivator, Miller. But integrity is the only thing that lets you sleep at night. You lost your badge the moment you chose fear over the truth. You'll never be a cop again. But if you talk, you might stay a free man. Miller talked. He gave up everything. He detailed the training Calloway gave rookies on how to escalate stops, how to provoke suspects, and how to write reports that justified force. The fallout reached the district attorney's office next. D.A. Harrison, who had so arrogantly demanded Gwen be held without bail, found himself the subject of a Bar Association inquiry led by Robert Felicity. Felicity didn't just want Harrison fired, he wanted him disbarred. "You suborned perjury," Felicity told Harrison during a deposition. "You knew the officer's testimony was shaky, you knew the body cam malfunction was suspicious, and you pushed it anyway because you wanted a political win. You traded justice for a headline." Harrison resigned in disgrace 3 weeks later. His political aspirations turned to ash. 6 months later, the federal courthouse in Atlanta was packed for the sentencing of Brett Calloway. He had pleaded guilty to avoid a trial that would have humiliated him further. The plea deal took the death penalty off the table for a related civil rights charge involving a previous victim the FBI uncovered, but it left the prison term open to the judge's discretion. Calloway stood before the bench. The arrogance was gone. He looked hollow, a shell of the bully he once was. Gwen stood to give a victim impact statement. He wore a crisp navy suit. He looked every bit the powerful figure Calloway had underestimated. "Your Honor," Gwen said, his voice filling the room. "Mr. Calloway isn't here because he made a mistake. A mistake is forgetting to turn on a turn signal. What Mr. Calloway did was a calculation. He looked at me, saw a black man in a rental car, and calculated that I was powerless. He calculated that his word was worth more than my freedom. He calculated that he could ruin my life to satisfy his own ego." Gwen paused, looking directly at Calloway. He was wrong. But the tragedy isn't that he tried to do it to me. The tragedy is how many times he did it to people who didn't have the power to fight back. For every Gwen Pearce, there are a dozen victims whose names we will never know because Officer Calloway's lies became their record. Today the system corrects itself. The federal judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Felicity, no relation to the lawyer, but equally sharp, looked down at Calloway. "Brett Calloway, you betrayed the public trust in the most vile way possible. You used the badge as a shield for your own criminality. You are sentenced to 25 years in a federal penitentiary, followed by 5 years of supervised release. You are stripped of your pension. You are remanded immediately." The gavel banged. It sounded like a gunshot. Calloway closed his eyes. 25 years? He would be an old man when he got out. He was led away in chains, not by his friends, but by U.S. Marshals who looked at him with disdain. Cop killers were hated in prison, but dirty cops were hated even more. He was going to a very dark, very lonely place. Gwen walked out of the courthouse. The sun was shining. Mrs. Gable was waiting for him at the bottom of the steps. She looked healthier, happier. "Justice?" she asked. "Justice." Gwen nodded. "I have something for you," she said, handing him a small box. Inside was a freshly baked batch of cookies and a thank-you card. "My son came home from deployment. He fixed the tire properly. He wanted to thank you for standing up for his mum. Tell him to keep you safe." Gwen smiled. Robert Felicity walked up, checking his watch. The civil suit against the city was settled this morning, Gwen. $4 million in damages for the unlawful arrest and excessive force. I don't want the money, Gwen said. I know, Felicity grinned. That's why I set it up as a trust, the Pierce Gable Legal Defense Fund. It will pay for legal representation for indigent defendants in Oakhaven who claim police misconduct. You're going to be a thorn in their side forever, Gwen. Gwen laughed. It was a genuine, deep laugh. Now that, he said, is what I call a legacy. He got into his car, his own car this time, a black SUV. He looked in the rearview mirror. He wasn't just a survivor of a corrupt stop anymore. He was the force that had cleansed a town. He started the engine. The radio crackled to life. And in Oakhaven today, a new interim police chief has been appointed, promising a complete overhaul of department policies following the sentencing of... Gwen turned the volume down. He didn't need to hear the news. He had lived it. He put the car in drive and headed toward the highway. There were other towns, other roads, and other battles to fight. But for today, the rain had stopped, and the road ahead was clear. And that is how Officer Brett Calloway learned that the badge on your chest doesn't make you a god, and the man in the rain might just be the one who ends your career. Calloway thought he was hunting a helpless victim, but he ended up trapping himself in a web of 4K evidence and federal justice. It's a brutal lesson in karma. When you abuse your power to destroy others, you're really just digging your own grave. What would you have done if you were in Gwen's shoes? Would you have been able to stay that calm while a gun was pointed at your face? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story where the arrogant get exactly what they deserve. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.